Hey everybody, what's up? Good afternoon. This is Anthony D'Ambrosio, and you are listening to the Ship Show Series podcast. Today is Thursday, September 21st, 2023, and this is episode number 35 in our series this year. So, folks, this week we have a very exciting show that is jam-packed. Jason and I are proud to be talking about the power of unlocking borderless logistics and how Supply Chain Solutions' latest acquisition of G4 International simplifies the complicated down at our southern border for cargoes moving in and out of Mexico. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about G4 International. Founded in 2016 by David Griffith on a premise of building a company and culture that embodies service and attention to the customer, David brings 35 years of diverse experience to our team. He is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and has a master's degree in international business from the University of New Mexico's Anderson School of Business and is also bilingual. David has assembled a group of very talented people who always take service to a higher level, and their service dedication extends to both sides of the border, and they work fluidly across the globe, leveraging the experience of their team. They are operators and solution designers ready to organize, streamline, and execute door to door for supply chain solutions and our clients. Now, this milestone marks a new chapter in our journey towards operational and customer service excellence in global logistics and supply chain solutions. And one of the things that really struck me about G4 is they have a great motto similar to our motto of always finding a better way. And their motto is making a difference for each client. And I just thought that was amazing because that's what we do here at Supply Chain Solutions. And that's what they do at G4 International. So please join me in welcoming our new president of North American Domestic Transportation and Mexico Operations, David Griffith. And finally, please join me in welcoming my show co-host, the incomparable Jason Brand. So Jason, David, greetings, and
Thank
what's
you.
happening today?
Well, honestly, it's a lot's been happening. A lot's been happening for the past couple weeks. So, a little bit of insider information here. We've known David for a long time, and actually, Les and Jim are great friends with David. We've worked with him many times in the past. He's kind of been our little best kept secret when it comes to dealing with some of the challenges that you deal with in Mexico. And so, I think if we went back in time, a few of us could say we could see this day coming at some point. We just didn't know when. So it's pretty exciting that it's now. But so David, let's just start from the very beginning. Tell us who you are, how you got into logistics, and kind of work your way up to G4 and the creation of that company.
Yeah, sure. So I started in the logistics business or the space with a Dallas-based freight forwarding company. But my first job was actually based in Mexico City. So I started kind of from the outside in, if you will, and ended up running their station there, air freight, ocean freight. But as you can imagine, in the location, there was a lot of cross-border activity at the time. We had some big customers, more inbound. Curious enough, Mexico was importing more from a consumer standpoint than they were exporting back in the day, and that's more than 30 years ago. Since then, I've moved into a couple of different big 3PL platforms. I spent some time in the oil patch with Halliburton Energy Services, kind of running around setting up inventory depots for them around the world in their supply chain from their equipment manufacturing group. Subsequently was with Bax Global, if you guys can remember that name, and then became DB Schenker. Spent some time with them, and then ultimately got into the YRC group, but always in the supply chain side of their businesses. I wasn't in their LTL world. That business got spun off which brought me back to Dallas with Neovia Logistics at the time. And as you guys mentioned, the reason I started G4 Logistics was to get back to the attention to the client, because of those big 3PLs. If you're not big or giant yourself, you really don't get the attention. And it's just a density kind of situation with them. So we felt like that the cross-border had the complexities that it was being underserved, but in a general logistic sense, customers were being underserved with quote unquote the big boys.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I have a longtime partner in Mexico, and I wouldn't have done this without her. We started both the U.S. office here in the Dallas market and the Mexico City operation within 90 days of each other. Nice. And so we do both domestic Mexico operations as well as cross-border, which we've spoken to, and then some value-added services here in the U.S. And with the supply chain solution guys, Jason, you're right. We have known each other for a while. We have actually helped each other. You guys have been kind of a set of tools that we didn't have on the international side, and then we kind of helped you guys out on the ground and in Mexico. So it is a very logical fit. And yes, somebody can look back and see the activities and go, "Oh, I see where they were going."
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. You know, I just want to just say this. It's a really attractive business model you built, having those two locations right across the border, because it's just really fascinating. I mean, you can talk to shippers who have been shipping to and from Mexico for a long time, and still some of their logistics department just doesn't understand exactly how it works. And when things go wrong, they also don't really understand how to fix them effectively. We've seen that numerous times, and like just having one company right across the border focused on that interaction, it's huge. I mean, you'd really expect it to be a border that would be more streamlined, but it's just not. And I don't think people understand that.
Well, there's three things that I look at and built the service behind this platform. One is language, which goes hand in hand with culture. So our staff in the U.S., actually about 60% of our group here is bilingual with Spanish. That's awesome. I've got a couple of native transplants that work out of the Dallas office. I've got Mexican nationals that work virtually with the group, so they are actually in the culture and know what they're doing. The second part is appreciating the regulatory environment of the country itself and the government bureaucracies of just how the company functions, and being able to anticipate what you need to do and what you need to be prepared for. And then the third is really the experience of the logistics work, right? So in a general sense, which we all talk about and can readily appreciate, but then also knowing the logistics work in Mexico, which has its own nuances that are unique, both from a customs, a trucking, any kind of intermodal handoff that are just unique. And so having experience on both sides of the border that appreciates that, the intent and the purpose of this is that it feels much more smooth than it actually is, right? It's the whole the duck on the water piece, right? Yeah, the feet are really going, but it's smooth. It's smooth on the top for the customer, which is what they want.
And you know, Dave, I'd just like to sort of piggyback off of that, because I think, you know, as we see companies starting to do more nearshoring operations to Mexico, as many companies around the globe start to decouple somewhat from China, you know, as you hit on so eloquently, one of the new challenges is the language barrier. And, you know, given the complications of cross-border logistics and the possibility for changes at a moment's notice, you know, you're so right. It's so important to have clear communication between all parties involved. It's critical because, if we're to remain competitive and ensure that the shipments are made efficiently, 3PLs like us have to have highly trained personnel ready to do business in various languages. And I think you'll attest to this, that relying on translators for skilled staff can really result in a vastly different customer service experience for shippers depending on their location. So when skilled staff are available to do business in both languages, like the G4 staff, okay, customers on both sides of the border receive that same level of quality, and the shipments are handled with that same level of care. And, I think that's one of there's so many areas of excellence that G4 has. And one of those couple of areas, as we're talking about, is that hand holding that you guys provide in a local environment and that attention to detail.
Well, and I see a lot of shippers that are doing business with Mexico, and the staff is dealing with their counterparts in Mexico, and many of them do speak English, right? But things get lost in a non-native communication and a lack of appreciation for the business processes that are going on behind the communicator. And I think that's what Supply Chain Solutions can offer today, with us sitting in the boat with you, is we can do that interpretation and do that anticipation, so that the workload and the guesswork, as Jason mentioned a minute ago, that gets things stuck. We're here to help with that anticipation and preparation. So.
Absolutely. Jason, back to you. I think you had some other points.
Honestly, there's a lot of stuff we got to talk about here. So first and foremost, you mentioned a lot of areas. I'm gonna not even talk about customs yet, because I love talking about Mexico customs because it is unique. But I do want to talk about intra-Mexico ground shipping. There's, we've been doing intra-Mexico. Well, actually, we mainly do cross-border ground shipping right now. But when we talk about the intra-Mexico component, we've got a lot of customers who have had a lot of issues when it comes to Mexico shipments. And do you have any strategies that your team has kind of employed? Do you feel like it kind of comes down to that bilingualism and also the cultural differences, appreciating that? But like, what's your kind of game plan when it comes for those style shipments?
Sure. So in Mexico, as a domestic trucking market, there really isn't a sophisticated platform that you would find in the U.S. where you can subscribe to a load board, find capacity. The carrier community in that capacity mix has been vetted and validated, right? So what we've found, and we've built a process ourselves, when we are sourcing capacity, in Mexico they're called logisticas, same thing as a freight broker, but it's incumbent upon us to vet our carrier capacity first, as opposed to what really happens in the U.S. of getting the load and then sourcing the carrier, right, based on a load board market price. But it doesn't work that way in Mexico. You have to have the pricing against known capacity, because you can't just reach into the bucket and find a truck to do that. Mm-hmm. So a couple of things that we do, and what's very similar is that you have specialists. So you have carriers that are specialists on routes. They're specialists with certain equipment mixes. And a lot of transportation companies aren't just dry van or reefer van focused. They typically have 2 or 3 conveyance types, right? So they do have both the big and the small straight truck. And a lot of times they'll even have the 1.5 ton hotshot type pickup trucks. Mm-hmm. But when you look at domestic transportation, there is expertise for drayage. There is expertise between the economic centers, and then there is expertise within a metropolitan area. So we try to procure and have capacity for all of those different services. Mm-hmm. So it's a little less flexible and it's a little longer walk up the hill.
Yeah.
But as you build that carrier base, there tends to be a loyalty and a quality of service that is repeatable.
Yeah, that it really sounds like it's doubling down, if not tripling down, on the relationship base that you need,
Yeah,
just to
for
make
sure.
sure you can really provide that service. And then we instigate a lot of track and trace technologies for our customers, but we found occasionally it can be very difficult because you have to go to individual carriers and ensure they're okay with that information sharing and things like that. I've got to imagine in the Mexican market that's another level of difficulty. Have you considered kind of installing some of that technology or looking into it, or do you feel like that's still 5-10 years down the line for really?
Well, no, you bring up an interesting point, and I'm gonna open a slightly different can of worms in the discussion, which is security.
Yeah.
Which goes hand in hand with the GPS tracking. So, and some of our customers in Mexico are making the transportation environment better. So there's a few things that is now going on. One is that with any level of trucking expertise, I would say there are several validated background check protocols that they do for their driver community, and most trucking companies have a GPS tracking platform on their assets.
Nice.
And what is very, very nimble with them is they create share links for particular loads that we get and we can incorporate into our TMS so that we really have as real-time tracking as we need to. In doing that, there's also an additional layer. Jason, I'm taking this a little bit around the corner here.
I love it. Keep going.
From a security standpoint, the GPS tracking is very pervasive, right?
Mm-hmm.
In real time, and we can watch live loads, and we do this quite a bit, right? Where we're talking to the carrier from Dallas, and they're telling us that the trucker is going to be there in 30 minutes. Which time in Mexico tends to expand itself. And so we go, great, that's awesome. Can you send us a link so that we can track it and let the shipper know?
Mm-hmm.
And so when that doesn't happen, then they get an extra dose of customer service from us to make sure that the service is going to happen.
Absolutely.
On top of that, there are high value shipments, and there is also retail ready that can be highly pilferable, if you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And there is an infrastructure in Mexico and we can secure custodial service, which is like a tracer or actually a lead car on truckload activity, depending on what the routes are and what the merchandise is. So you've got two layers, two sets of eyes with ongoing radio reporting for any unplanned or unscheduled stops or anything like that. And then that service has got a connection back to the authorities, so the response time can be very, very quick if something were to happen.
That is so
and I just like to touch on that real quick, because that's one of the amazing things that G-Force team does as it relates to mitigating risk of cargo theft in Mexico, because as we all know, that presents its own set of risk, right? And cargo security is so important. But I think also when you think about it, unfortunately, there is a lot of theft that's more common in Mexico. I think it's 17,000 plus annual incidents a year on the Mexico side, and over 700 plus annual incidents a year on the U.S. side. And I think, in Mexico, cargo is most frequently stolen by being hijacked, and food and beverage products are really very popular with the thieves. Unfortunately, I wish there was a better word that we could use, and that represents about 40% of the cargo stolen from trucks. So I think David would agree that I think, there's several things that can be done to protect your cargo, and G4 does them so amazing. And I just want to say, knowing who's moving your freight within Mexico, having those right relationships in a local environment, and one of the things that G4 does when they work with their providers is they assess the risk by lane and route. They pay attention to the timing, like David was just talking about, and they get as much visibility as possible, in addition to sometimes hiring those escorts to follow those shipments. So, Dave, please jump in and let me know if that doesn't sound like it's spot on.
No, it is. It is, Anthony. That's exactly what we do. And we actually have different groups of carriers with different capabilities based on where their base of operation is in Mexico. They're more comfortable operating near or in what are considered hotspots. And those ebb and flow in the country by state and even by metropolitan area. And so we're able to give a texture to the carrier types and enhance our reach for giving capacity to American shippers or American consignees, as the case may be, right? So if you're only procuring from a traditional big American carrier that's got network relationships in Mexico, there'll be places that they can't touch and won't do pickups. And leave a gap in your supply chain, and which is where we would raise our hand and say, well, we have alternative solutions for that at the same level of security, right? But just different local expertise, if you will, that can do that.
And Dave, what's one real quick thing before we move on? You made me think of this while you were just unpacking that for us. Despite the high incidence of cargo theft in Mexico, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm aware that the Mexican carriers are not really required by law to carry cargo insurance, and the vast majority do not.
That's a great point.
So tell us a little bit about the insurance. I know there's not a lot of incentive for the carriers to buy the insurance because they're liable for a very small amount if a shipment is stolen or damaged, regardless of the value. But what are some of the best ways to kind of get that coverage for your freight? And how does G4 handle that?
Well, so you're right, Anthony. In Mexico, and any logistics company, and quite frankly, any asset-based carrier moves the cargo at the risk of the beneficial cargo owner.
Okay.
So the insurance sits behind the transaction, if you will, as a corporate policy. But as you mentioned, and we can do this from an insurance platform with a special all-risk cargo insurance rider, we can insure the transaction. Obviously, we need to know the characteristics of the shipment, the commercial value, and we'll need to plan the route so that we stay in compliance with the stipulations from the underwriting group that does this. But we absolutely can physically insure the transaction if need be, through to destination or from pickup in Mexico.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Jason, back to you. I know you might have some other.
I got to be careful because this is a rabbit hole here, because I wanted to talk about the cultural differences now, because in the U.S., the U.S. trucking market, we have a very different experience, but we also have a different trucking culture. It sounds like vastly different. I mean, don't track me out on the open road, don't control me kind of thing. I mean, for example, back in, I think it was January 2018, we had the electronic logging device mandate come into effect. And we saw just an exodus of truck drivers because they didn't like the idea of them being managed on, in that industry. And so on the flip side, now over in Mexico, we have a situation where being GPS tracked can be a benefit to everyone, especially given those security concerns. And that's just such a fascinating flip in my mind. But okay, statement, that's all the depth I want to go into that for right now. I really want to talk a little bit about customs because people don't understand the differences between U.S. customs and Mexican customs. And, Dave, you've broken it down to me before. I think you do an excellent job of it. Could you kind of discuss crossing the border and the customs requirements in Mexico?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll share a little bit of the insight that creates the secret sauce for us, is knowing the difference for an import and an export. So let me start off by talking about Mexican customs in and of itself. Unlike the US, for any transaction, even for exports, you have to do the same commodity classification and presentation of a clearance. It's the same for imports and exports. Now, for exports, the tediousness is less invasive and more statistical, which as it should be, but it's still tedious in the sense that you have to have a customs broker. And in order to set up with a customs broker, you actually have to create a customer vendor relationship, which in Mexico is tedious based on the regulations of invoicing and what have you, as you go. But the inbound piece is, and we always start off trying to filter what the external shipper is trying to do when sending product into Mexico. The first thing I ask everybody is the consignee, is your customer a registered importer? And people don't appreciate that. Well, he wants to buy it and I want to send it to him.
Yeah.
Well, but if the recipient is actually not a registered importer, they haven't gone to the government, said, hey, I'm in the business of doing this and I'm going to be importing these kinds of commodities. Yeah. If they don't do that, they cannot be party to that transaction.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'll hasten to say that imports can still happen. There is kind of a sub-industry, if you will, of trading companies that actually are registered importers in a broad range of commodities. However, we still need to clearly know what those descriptions are so that they can be properly classified. And if there are any other registration requirements, those can be taken care of before the cargo actually gets to the border. So the biggest problem that I see time and time again is somebody did a cursory review, a commercial transaction took place, the shipment got on its way to the border, it gets there, and it doesn't have a breakdown of the commercial invoice so it can be properly classified. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have the importer either properly registered or they're registered in a general sense, but they don't have licenses for 3 of the 12 products that they're trying to import. And so everything slows down to a halt until all of those requirements can be taken care of. And sometimes, it's a next day registration, but sometimes it's a get an appointment, get in line and wait for your day at the counter. And a lot of the external people, especially Western Europe, United States, and even Canada, they're like, well, come on, man, everything is automated and it works just like that, but it doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. It eventually becomes digital, but once all the regulatory pieces are satisfied. So, and I think that's something that we can add value to. We can go slow to go fast, mm-hmm. if that makes sense, right? So
great point.
When people say, hey, well, I want to book this, I want to do this, I'm like, okay. Well, let's have a 15-minute conversation. Here's 4 questions I need you to answer. Mm-hmm. Is your consignee a registered importer? And sometimes I go, well, what do you mean? And we explain that to them. And they go and ask, and if the answer is yes, and you go, great. Do they have a nominated customs broker? Mm-hmm. Sometimes they do, which is great. Sometimes they don't. We can help and bring that to bear, but those things still need to be set up. Mm-hmm. So, and you can feel maybe the tediousness of that setup as I've been trying to explain it. Oh, yeah. But then once it's set up, we can do both inbound and outbound customs clearances in a matter of hours. Mm-hmm. but you have to set everything up in order for that to happen. And then it's as quick as any other operating process that people appreciate day in and day out.
Yeah, and Dave, that's go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say that the setup and asking the right discovery questions is what we can do to make people's supply chains go faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was just going to segue on that and just say, that's why you guys are so amazing down there. You've got such a great team, and when we talk about, borderless logistics, I think supply chain solutions, Mexico cross-border solution is really a specialized service, and that's what you guys have done. You've designed it and streamlined it and simplified the logistics of the northbound and southbound freight across the U.S.-Mexico border. And it's a combination of leveraging our technology, your expansive network of partners, and your deep understanding and industry expertise. So, that's going to just drive a lot of delivered value across a lot of multiple touch points for our mutual cross-border customers. So, we're so excited, but those are such important points. And again, folks, it's about relationships in a local environment who have that bilingual capability, who understand how to make the local arrangements and ensure the smooth flow of the cargo and the communications in and out of Mexico. And another thing I know that David wanted to talk about, which is why Laredo is so important, not just Nogales, but Laredo as well, down at the border, So Dave, I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, many folks know that there is a corridor for Mexico. You can look at the border and say, well, there's lots of places to cross. And we do a lot of transportation where we are either picking up on the West Coast and bringing it into the interior of Mexico. And people go, oh, that's great. You're going to go across Tijuana or Calexico or Nogales, as the case may be. But what people lose sight of or don't have an appreciation for is that you have the Sierra Madres mountain range running all down the Pacific side of the country, where Nogales, Calexico, and Tijuana or Otay Mesa, all of those border points are typically accessing local northern regional manufacturing hubs. And they're kind of contained in their own little supply chains. The vast majority of the destinations in the Golden Triangle, as they call it, which is from Monterrey down to Mexico City and over to Guadalajara and back up, in all of that area in between, which is known as the Bajío area or the lowlands, as they call it, is really where the density of both manufacturing, subassembly, and finished goods production takes place. So from raw materials in or subassembly items in to the export of finished goods, either to an OEM or directly to a market, you can see geographically that logically all feeds up through Laredo.
Yeah.
And Laredo has 3 crossing bridges, and it's still a pretty dense operation. And as a matter of fact, I was watching a shipment yesterday, and we needed to get it across, and we checked with the guys. He goes, "Yeah, the driver's in line, and the line is 15 kilometers long."
What? Could you imagine? Oh my God!
Wow. He's in the back, but he'll be there.
But the shipment got across, right? Man. And transportation handoff, and it's run into destination. So it is super important. And from a transit time standpoint, people go, "Oh my gosh, going all the way to Texas from California, why would you do that?" It's actually shorter than trying to go through a Nogales or a Calexico because of the mountains, the lack of the highway infrastructure, and quite frankly, the lack of trucking capacity to do so.
Yeah.
So
the real estate.
And Dave hits on a big point there, Jay, too, real quick before we go back to you, is that infrastructure. That's one of the big issues in Mexico as well. And Dave, please correct me if I'm wrong. some areas are great, but then when you think about some of that infrastructure, it's really lacking.
Yeah, it's still coming. It's still
Yeah,
coming.
it's still
For sure.
coming. Yeah, Jason, back to you.
Honestly, just a quick point. We were trying to get a slice of some Laredo warehousing a while back, and that is some really hard to come by square footage.
Yeah, that's some expensive real estate for sure.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. And when you take a look from a satellite view of Laredo, you really see, wow, it is maximized. So I really want to get down there and check it out with my own eyes, because I've talked about Laredo so much, I've heard about Laredo so much, and yeah, I mean, you just reemphasize the importance of it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I think a couple of the things we just want to touch on is just some of the key capabilities. As everyone has been hearing, Supply Chain Solutions was very fortunate to be able to make the acquisition of G4 International, as well as a major operation in Mexico. So, coupled with our new acquisition down in Mexico City, Monterrey, Veracruz, and now with G4 in Dallas, down at Laredo, and down at the border, we have some really amazing key capabilities. And some of those capabilities are, our expertise with the customs clearance and understanding, the customs laws and regulations, the advanced tracking and GPS monitoring and tracking of solutions that we're going to be able to provide to our customers, along with our strategic warehousing that's situated near crucial border points, that we can do storage and transloading and distribution services, including last mile. We're going to have a diverse, suite of transportation modes, including rail and intermodal and road and sea and air, to meet our clients' unique needs, in addition to all of the security measures and the rigorous security protocols that Dave's team has in place, like 24/7 surveillance and that all risk cargo insurance coverage. And then, of course, something that's so critical is that multilingual support, and it really, when you think about Supply Chain Solutions and G4 International, it's really about end-to-end services, a seamless logistics process that handles the goods from the point of origin to the final destination. And then also, that added hassle-free value, those processes to add hassle-free value to everybody's experience, So we really are excited about, Dave's team joining Supply Chain Solutions. And Dave, if I could put you on the spot, why don't you just tell us about some of your superstars that work in your organization? And, you guys have such a great team there. I think we'd like to hear a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, for sure. So in the Dallas group, we've kind of, as you guys can appreciate, since we've been talking about all this cross-border stuff, we actually have a dedicated team with Cesar Heredia Sedano, who is a transplant from Mexico. As a matter of fact, he just got his U.S. citizenship the other day. He's been here almost 50 years.
That's a tough process too.
Yeah. He's a graduate from Texas Tech.
Cesar.
For the Red Raiders. And he's got a couple of guys that work both the carriers on the U.S. side and the pricing and the booking on the Mexican side. We have a guy, Luis Matt, who's down in Mexico City, who actually handles all of our pricing and has a relationship with the carriers. And then Jorge Parra, who works here out of the Dallas office, is really, really important for all of the documentation and interface with the customs brokers at the border. But we also have a group that we're pretty good at the drayage work, so supporting Supply Chain Solutions and some of their international groups. We have Andy and Latrice that work both on domestic operations and drayage, as well as some specialty stuff with flatbeds and other things. And then down in Mexico, with Teresa and her team, her operating team of Jorge and Cuauhtemoc, they do a lot of the domestic. We do a lot of DC to store retail work. Talking about kind of metropolitan area, we do a lot of 1.5 ton pickups and then 53-foot dry vans that, and we're bumping the dock, feeding these stores every night, and making sure that nothing goes missing in a 24/7 type operation. So, yeah, it's good teams.
You guys you've assembled a great team. Jason, back to you. What else do you want to unpack?
That's what we got a lot to unpack, but that's what we got for today. So honestly, David, really appreciate you coming on here and us grilling you about Mexico, because let me tell you, so many people are considering Mexico right now, and sometimes we don't have the complete answer, but now we do. So I'm pretty excited about that. David, welcome to the team. Thank you so much for joining us today as well.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And remember, when you think about supply chain solutions and G4 International, Dallas, Mexico, it's global presence, local expertise, and we are going to knock it out of the park for you guys whenever we're involved in your total supply chain needs. Jason, any final words?
Make it a great day and adios.
And in Mexico, que tengas un gran día. Ciao, ciao.
Wait, is that correct?
Adios.
Fantastic.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye now.